Good morning. Or is it afternoon? Or is it tonight? Or is it tomorrow? Well, I guess it depends when you're watching. The Psalms chapter 3 is called the morning psalm. So I know it's afternoon now, but Psalms 3 is called the morning psalm because David is directing his heart to look up to God in the morning, at the beginning of the day. Psalms 3, a psalm of David, says, O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter up of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings be upon your people. Amen. Psalm 3 is called the morning psalm. The psalm right after, Psalms 4, is called the evening psalm because in verse 8, the psalmist said, In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, are the one that helps me to dwell in safety. And so Psalms 3, Psalms 4, the morning and evening psalms, one after each other. Have you ever gotten up on the wrong side of the bed? The wrong side? Now, what side is the wrong side of the bed? Have you ever wondered that? Is it the right? Is it the left? Is it the right or left, depending on which way your head is faced? Which side is the wrong side of the bed? Well, that phrase came from ancient Rome, an ancient Roman culture that believed in superstition, and they believed that the wrong side was whatever side you got out and put your left foot down first. So if you put your left foot down first out of your bed at the beginning of the day, you got off on the wrong foot and got out on the wrong side of the bed. They also believed that left-handed people were greatly unlucky and were to be feared above all. When we talk about the phrase, the wrong side of the bed, though, what we mean by that, if someone got up on the wrong side of the bed, we mean that they're grumpy this morning. They're irritable. They're someone you want to just be a little bit careful about on that particular day. And when we say that kind of phrase, they got up the wrong side of the bed, we also mean that they need to see the good that is all around them. Sometimes we need reminders from our Heavenly Father that we can have good days, even in the midst of bad. Sometimes we need this reminder. Someone wrote, Good morning. This is God. I will be handling your schedule today. If I need your help, I'll let you know. Otherwise, have a good day. This is what David was reminding us of in Psalms chapter 3, verse 1 through 8. David wrote Psalms 3 during the dark days when his son Absalom had led a rebellion against him, and David and his men and those loyal to him are on the run for their lives. You can read more about that in 2 Samuel chapter 15. Throughout Psalms 3, you see the subtle references to David's difficult days, to the darkness of David's night. He said in verse 1, many people are rising up against me. And verse 2, he says, and maybe even they're telling me God has even rejected me. God has abandoned me. Then verse 6, he references the large number of enemies again. And in verse 7, he reminisces of past victories that God has brought to him, and remembering that God is his shield in verse 3, and verse 7, that God is the one who leads in battle. And so as David prays this morning psalm, in the middle of the tragedies and the hardships of his day, the trouble and conflict with his son Absalom in the civil war that had arisen, David is rejoicing in the middle of this, that he had a God who has not abdicated his role, has not abandoned him, but God is reigning and ruling over David's life. And God's reminder to you this afternoon, in the middle of whatever you may be facing, he is in charge. As Christians today, we can rejoice in God who does all things well. David knew that in the battles of his day, that he served a God who was faithful and dependable. Even when David's own world was falling apart, God was faithful and dependable still. As God's people, we all have enemies and battles that we fight. And so, too, we need this reminder. We need this psalm. This psalm is not to be one of complaining and regret and mourning. It begins with stating the prayer request that's on David's heart, but this psalm is not one that says, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me, poor me, poor me. That's not the point of it. This psalm, this morning psalm, is a psalm of victory, because even on the dark days, on your dark days, you are not alone. God is with you to see you through. So firstly, today I want us to notice that David shows us what we can do when life falls apart. He shows you what you can do when life falls apart. When we read the first two verses, verse 1 and 2, you see that David begins with making a choice. When the enemy strikes, you have a choice to make. I have a choice to make. We can either turn from God or we can turn to God. That's your choices. From God or to God. You can either we can use suffering either to justify unbelief and reject God, or we can use suffering to spur us on to belief and deepen our faith in God. David chooses to turn to the Lord to direct his thoughts, and so he prays. And he's a reminder to us on bad days, on days where you might feel discouraged or depressed or just feeling the weight of uncertain days. Don't just give up, but pray. Prayer is the privilege of the saints. It's the privilege of each and every Christian. So David shows us that what we can do when life falls apart, we have to make the choice to pray. But then there are complaints that we can raise as well, that we can raise. There are prayer requests that God does invite us to bring before His throne. God doesn't just expect us to go through life saying, "Oh, everything's okay." It's sunshine and butterflies and rainbows all the way through. Never a hardship, never a tear. That's not it. For David opened his heart. In verse 1, he says, How many are my foes? His adversaries were on the rise. He was feeling lonely, desperate, and discouraged. His own son rebelling against him, seeking to kill him, seeking to destroy everything that David had built. And David says, many rise up. Many rise up. Some days you may feel like that. That many problems or fears or doubts are rising up in your life. Jesus said in John 16:33, in this world you will face tribulation. It's part of life. You're going to have bad days. You're going to face uncertain times. But Jesus didn't end the verse there. He said, be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world already. And so in the middle of times when you feel like David, when you feel like the whole world is against you and all is lost, don't give in to despair, but rather remember Jesus has said, I have overcome the world already. I have overcome the world already. There's an old World War II poster that was used during the fall of France, and most of Europe has been subdued by the Nazis, and it was used as a rallying point, a picture of a lone British soldier standing on the breaches of the island of Great Britain, shaking his fist across the channel, and he said this, very well, alone. Whatever it takes, the British were determined never to surrender, never to give up. And so as David is bringing these requests before God, bring his heart before God, we can be reminded as we read this psalm again of the words of Jesus, that we're not alone. The British may have felt like they were alone for a time, and the battle of Britain would begin. But we're not alone when you face the battles that are raging in your day. For Jesus is with you. He's with you still, and He's overcome the world already. In verse 2, David said, there is no salvation or help from God. And he said, I feel completely abandoned. I feel alone, Lord. Are you there? The devil seeks to deceive this way, to try to make you feel abandoned by God. But God has promised in Hebrews 13, 5 and 6, He promised that He'll never leave us alone. God said, I'll never leave you or abandon you. I'm with you always. I'll never abandon you. And so we can say with boldness, with courage, with confidence that we need not be afraid. The devil will lie and say you've done too much, or you've gone too far, or God won't help you now because of what you're facing is too big. But God says in Isaiah 55 verse 7, let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that He may have compassion on him, and to our God who will abundantly pardon. The devil seeks to manipulate you into going it alone at times, saying, oh, you're all by yourself. You have no hope. No one cares. Not even God cares. The devil tries to manipulate you that way. But Jesus says in Matthew 11:28, come to me, all you who are labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. John 8:44, Jesus says, remember this, the devil is a liar and the father of lies, and he's been a murderer from the beginning. Our part is to take the shield of faith, wherewith we'll be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Ephesians 6, verse 16. And this is what David does as he goes to the main part of his prayer in verse 3. through 8. Verse 1 and 2, David shows us what we can do when life falls apart. We can pray. But secondly, David shows us shows us that we can look to God and see who he is and what he will do. So David chooses not to dwell on the negative for long. And so in verse 3, he shifts his focus away from his complaints, away from his prayer burdens, and says, But you, O Lord, are a shield about me. His eyes look up to the greatness of God. And so God is David's shield. God is the one that protects you from attack today. In the spiritual warfares and battles you may face, God is your shield. Just as good armor protects David in combat, so he recognized that it's not just physical combat that he needed armor for and that he needed to be prepared for. In spiritual warfare that raged in the depths of his heart, with discouragement and dark days, he knew he needed the armor of God. And so he needed God to be his shield for those difficult days. In these days, remember, you are not alone. God is with you. God is your shield to protect you, to defend you, to deflect the fiery darts of the wicked one. But then David says, but you can also see God's glory. God's glory literally means here a heaviness or a weightiness. When soldiers went away to battle, they went away lighter than when they came back, if they were victorious. When they went away, they went just with their armor on. But when they came back from battle victorious, they come back bearing the spoils of war, the weight of that riches that they had accumulated. And so David says, my hope is in a God who is my shield and who's not just distant and far removed, but is present with me to be my protector and to be the one that will bring me victory, whereby I can rejoice that the spoils of war can be brought forth again. In verse 3 he ends verse 3 with these words, he is the lifter up of my head, the lifter up of my head. David's encouragement and strength wasn't in his close counselors. It wasn't in his mighty men that stayed with him. The lifter up of his head was God. God's presence, God's strength, God's encouraging words. And so in the face of terrible days and discouraging days for you, whenever you have them, remember God is the lifter up of your head. He is the one you're to find your strength in. He is the one you're to be encouraged, find your encouragement in. May we see God today as our shield. May you see God today as the victorious, conquering King. May you see him afresh as the lifter up of your heads. So David chooses to see who God is. But then David commits to seek God. He said, I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answers me. I cried aloud, and he answered me from his holy hill. And this is the second time he uses the word Selah. In verse 2, he uses the word, and at the end of verse 4, he says Selah again to remind us to stop and think about that. Remember who God is. Remember who you're crying out to. You're not crying out to someone who may or may not help you. You're crying out to a God who listens, a God who loves, a God who cares. So David commits to seek God. And in verse 5 and 6, David renews his confidence in God. He says in verse 5, I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. You see, he found he could rest in God. I lay down and slept. We can say, wait a minute, David. In the middle of a battle, you're really going to lay down and sleep? That's not the time for it. You're in battle. You see, David said, I can rest in my God. I can rest in my love. He had confidence in God, you see. He had confidence to trust. And so he said, I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. It was the Lord who refreshed me and given me strength for the battles ahead. And so I could have confidence in my God. And so I will not be afraid, as he says in verse 6. Why? Because he had chosen to depend on God. He had placed his confidence in God. In verse 7 and 8, as the psalm draws to a close, David calls God to action. Not in pettiness or complaining or whining, but he armed with that confidence that God was with him. He comes to God in the place of prayer and says, Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. As he prays this prayer, he was acknowledging his confidence and his faith in God that he was confessing anew to stir his hearts to new heights as he recognized he serves a God who does all things well. And this afternoon, remember, you serve a God who does all things well. He made his request known to God. He said, Lord, you're the one who can deliver me. And you've done it in the past and you'll do it again. Notice in this prayer, David doesn't name Absalom. 2 Samuel 19, he mourns his son's death. when Absalom is finally killed in battle. And so we learn from David in the place of prayer not to name enemies and point fingers and that kind of praying to God. For we may not be facing the enemy that we think. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." So remember, on bad days, on hard days, when you're praying, you think you know who the enemy is. You think you know who your enemy is. It may not be who you think. We're facing spiritual battles today. In verse 8, he rejoices, "Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings, O Lord, be upon your people." Not just for us. This promise is not just for us, but for a gift for all who walk with God. Salvation, your help belongs and comes from the Lord, and we are blessed to be his. So how do we apply this psalm? Well, again, at the end of verse 8, he says, Selah again. Stop and think about this. The blessings come from God. But how do we apply this? Well, when you feel attacked, you should cry out to the Lord for help. When you're tempted to sin, cry out to the Lord for help. When others tear you down or tear down the work of the Lord, cry out to the Lord for help. Find your confidence renewed in God. He is your shield. And we know for sure that he will protect us when the arrows fly. In fact, we are so sure of his help that David says we can sleep soundly. We can go to sleep, as he gets to in chapter 4. He said we can be at peace and lie down, for we are not alone. O Lord, you make us to dwell in safety. So today, whenever you face hard times and difficult days, challenges, here's what you do. Worship God. Pray. Seek his face. Seek the blessings of his presence on your life so that you can be like David when you face terrible, horrible, no good, very bad days and say, I can lay down and sleep. I can wake, for the Lord sustains me. The Lord is my help, and my blessings come from him. In closing today, it would be good if you take some time today and sing the little chorus, Learning to Lean. It's in our chorus book, and it goes like this, learning to lean, learning to lean. I'm learning to lean on Jesus, finding more power than I had ever dreamed. I'm learning to lean on Jesus. May that be your prayer and your treasure today. May God bless you.